everyone, my name is Lana. I'm a librarian at the University of Adelaide, and thank you for joining me today on Kaurna Land for this webinar. I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land from where I'm presenting from today, and pay my respect to elders past and present. And please feel free to pop into the chat if you'd like to acknowledge where you're tuning in from also. So welcome to part 3 of our 5-part series that the library is hosting this semester. Over these 5 weeks, we're looking at everything from searching to managing your references, and we invite you to join or watch any of these recordings to kickstart your studies at university. Today, though, we'll be looking at evaluating the outputs of GenAI-powered search strategies. So we'll start with a bit of a quick recap of what GenAI or Generative Artificial Intelligence is, how it generates its outputs, and then we'll dive into how we can use GenAI to help us with our search strategies to find information, and we'll evaluate as we go what it generates. A little bit of housekeeping. So this session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the University Library's YouTube channel and our library webinar website. We will also send you a follow-up link with an email, a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well. Please feel free to pop any questions into the chat throughout the session. We also have Rachel online this morning. She's a colleague of mine and will help with answering any questions if I don't see them straight away. Otherwise, we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end as well. So I'm just going to firstly just pop up a poll just with 2 quick questions. Where are we? So first question, just so I know who it is that I'm talking to. First question just asks you what year of study you're in, and second is what faculty you're from. Let's just see if that's launching for us. There we go, should be up now. Just give you a moment to answer in there. Feel free as well to take notes throughout the webinar as we go, but know that you can come back and watch this recording at any time as well. So let's just dive into our content for today. First up, I just want to show you, we'll introduce you to some of the resources that we have around AI. So if you are on the library website, under our How Do I guides, we have a guide on artificial intelligence, and this is probably one of our more popular guides that we do have. Sorry, it's being a little bit slow this morning. Thinking about it. We'll just let that load. Okay, I think it's thinking. Okay. Okay, we might come back to it. But if you do go into our How Do I guides, under Find Information, we've got a guide called Artificial Intelligence. And in there, there's heaps of information we've sorted into different aspects of using AI during your studies. But to point out, in this guide, we also have links to any of our relevant recordings, other webinars that we've done. So it seems to be somewhat loading. Let's see if we can get into it. There we are. So this is our guide here. And just pointing out our library webinar collection down here. So last year we conducted a masterclass in GenAI. So a whole lot of videos. So if you want to go more in depth about what GenAI is, how to use it, how it works and whatnot, there are that series there. There is also last semester we did a 2-part video series, and today's version is kind of a condensed an updated version of these 2. So if you wanted to go back and have a look at those, you can as well. Okay, let's just switch it back. So first up, let's just talk about what GenAI actually is. So GenAI or Generative AI refers to artificial intelligence systems that can create new content, including text, images, video, code, and a whole lot more. You're probably familiar with some of these systems such as ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, or Perplexity, and they're all trained on huge amounts of data, and they can generate human-like responses to prompts or questions. Now, how it all actually works is quite complex, but by having just a little bit of a grasp on how it works can make it a bit easier just to understand that it does have its limitations and some things to look out for. So there are a few steps involved before you come out with models like ChatGPT or Claude. First, there is the concept of artificial intelligence, which describes the ability for a computer to do something that we'd normally associate with human intelligence. Then next is machine learning, and this is the process of teaching or educating an AI system with data. So this involves feeding it a lot of data into that system so it can start discovering patterns and different relationships between that data. So the more data you give it, the better it gets at recognizing patterns and then being able to make decisions based on that new data or based on new data that it hasn't seen before. And then the next level from this is deep learning. And deep learning uses artificial neural networks with many different layers, which allows the system to discover more complex patterns and continuously refine their understanding of language and ability to generate responses. And then from there, we have generative AI. And generative AI can create new content by learning how to recognize and replicate patterns in data using these deep learning models. And when these deep learning systems, so GenAI is a deep learning system, when these deep learning systems are used for language, that's what we call large language models or LLMs. So things like your ChatGPT, your Claude. So they sit somewhere in there in that GenAI bubble. So GenAI has become incredibly popular in a very short amount of time, probably due to its relatively high success rate in providing accurate and human-like responses, but it's not 100% foolproof. It does have some limitations, and we'll go through a few of them here. So first up, there is the potential for inaccurate or outdated information. So this potentially could depend on the cutoff date for the model for its training data. Originally, ChatGPT, when it was first released, had a cutoff date for 2021. Anything after that, it wasn't aware of. The free version now, I believe, is up to about September 2023. Claude is up to about November 2024. However, if these models, and they usually do, have access to the internet, doesn't necessarily mean there is a cutoff date because they can go and retrieve information as it's produced from the internet. And then if the model does have internet access, where is it sourcing its information from? Is it grabbing information from like a Facebook post or something or a Reddit post? What training data is it being fed? So all of these could lead to inaccurate or outdated information. Next up, there's potential for lack of original research or insights. So Gen AI relies on a bit of probability when it gives you its results. So it's like you're kind of getting a bit of an average of all the potential answers, not necessarily an exceptional answer. There's a possibility of biased outputs, so that could stem from the training data that it's been given. It could also stem from the prompt you yourself gave it. If there was a bit of bias in there, it might follow that. Sometimes it doesn't really understand context or nuance very well. So if you ask it or prompt it with something that's quite vague or unclear or ambiguous, or it could have multiple meanings, you might not get the response that you were expecting from it. And then there's also the potential for plagiarism. So while they say that these models generate new content, they can accidentally plagiarize stuff without you knowing. And then there's one final crucial concept that we should be aware of when working with AI, and this is hallucinations. So AI hallucinations is when AI generates false information or information that just doesn't make sense, and it usually does so with very high confidence. It thinks that it is accurate. So this is probably one of the most popular examples of an AI hallucination. It's sometimes referred to as the strawberry test. And you can see how confident the model is in the number of R's in the word strawberry. It says 2, there's obviously 3 R's in strawberry. So the lesson here is if you yourself are ever asking something and you have, no idea about the topic itself, then you need to be cross-checking. You need to be going and making sure that you're getting the correct or reasonable sort of answers. Now, before we dive into some of the ways that we can use AI to help with searching, just a little bit of a disclaimer. So while I am showing you some different ways that you can use these models to help with searching and research, it's always best to check that it is okay for you to do this if there is some assessment involved, especially if your assessment, involves showing how you developed your search strategy or your research topic in any way. Yeah, so, and if that's all good, cool. Just make sure you pop in an acknowledgement at the end with your assessment, and on our guide that I showed you earlier, we've got sort of a template of how to do that, how to include that in your assessment. Okay, so now when you're planning your search, there are some really basic, I suppose, essential steps that you should be in the habit of doing. First is identifying keywords, your key concepts that you're interested in researching. And then next is finding what alternative terms, similar terms you could use during your search. And then third is putting this all together into a search strategy. So, what are you actually typing into your search bar? And if you do want a little bit more information on this or explanation on this, we do have some previous webinars on mastering library search and searching smarter that will take you through step by step on planning your search. But today we're going to see how GenAI can help us with these steps. So one of the first steps in developing your search strategy is to come up with alternative search terms or synonyms for your concepts that you're interested in. Now you could go to a thesaurus, you could do a Google search, you could look at articles of interest and see what keywords the authors have used. But for today's session, let's see what two different large language models can do for us. And just one more thing before we do dive into this, just something else to be aware of is that sometimes these models could be or can be susceptible to regionalization. And what we mean by regionalization is when different countries refer to the same concept, but just using different terms. And sometimes AI will sort of only have one country's perspective on something. So sometimes, there might be one set of researchers like to use the term global warming and another set use climate change. Yeah, so just something to be aware of there. Again, don't treat this as a one-stop shop. It's a good place to start your brainstorming. But yeah, just be aware that there are things you might be missing out on key sort of terminology there. Okay, so one of my first questions to explore was, does varying your prompts affect the results that are given? So for my initial task, I had two different prompts for both ChatGPT and Claude doing the same thing. So the first prompt had no context at all. I just gave it a task. And then the second prompt, I said, I have a task. I gave it some context and I asked for some help. So let's see how prompting differently can affect your results. Okay, so first up, I tried ChatGPT, and the no context prompt that I tried was, what are some synonyms for the term gut microbiome? Okay, so pretty simple, not an unexpected result. It's given us a list of synonyms and related terms, and it's given us a bit of context for us at the end, that one of the terms is slightly older and, maybe less precise than the term we're after. So maybe that's a bit of a hint that you should check the meaning of all the other terms here before just blindly accepting that these are going to be useful for you or in your scope of searching. Okay, so let's compare with Claude now. So same prompt, okay, and very similar. Again, just it's given us a list. It's not the same list. There are different terms in here. So here's why you might try more than one model. And rather than giving any context at the end, it's just given us a bit of a definition of the term that we're interested in. So if that suits your needs, absolutely you can try just using a no context prompt, just giving it an instruction. But let's see what happens when you do give some context. Okay, so the prompt I used, giving a little bit of context. I am a first year university student studying biology, and I need to research some articles on gut microbiome. I want to find as many relevant results as possible. So what are some other possible search terms that could be used for gut microbiome? And you could tweak this to whatever your situation is to suit. So let's see what we get. Okay, so for this response, this one actually goes over a couple of pages. So straight away, by giving more context, we're getting a more in-depth, a more thorough response now that the model knows what your purpose is for asking for synonyms. So we've got some alternative terms for gut microbiome. We've got some broader and related terms. We've got some specific or narrow terms, and it's also given us some functional or health-related terms and some different, combinations there that you could try. So yeah, it's sort of categorized rather than just listing terms there. And then at the end, because it knows that you're going to be doing some searching, it's giving you some suggestions for search strategies. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at these. So first up, it has suggested using and or, and it's capitalized them, which is great. Second thing to note, it hasn't used phrase searching. So it hasn't used quotation marks around key concepts where there's 2 or more words. So gut microbiome should have quotation marks around it, generally in most databases that we search in. And then third, it's not as much of an issue, but it's used brackets quite excessively, in my opinion. I suppose the third example is the most correct in that it has nested these or terms. It's put those together when you have 2 different concepts, but the very outside brackets, we don't really need those there. Similarly with this second one, because they're 2 different concepts and it's just one of each, like one keyword of each concept, we don't need brackets around. And then I suppose the top one, if we were just doing a search just on this one concept and listing different or terms, wouldn't need to put brackets around there. So you only need to put brackets when you're nesting, if you've got multiple concepts that you're searching for, and then within each concept, you've got multiple variation in there. But again, if you want more understanding of that, just have a look at some of our previous webinars. Okay, so let's see what Claude does for a contextual prompt. Okay, so same prompt again, and we can see straight away maybe it's not as exciting as ChatGPT. It's not given us as much, but is it more to the point? Is it less for you to have to sift through and evaluate if this is useful to you? In terms of actually evaluating this response, all I would say is if you don't know what some of these terms mean, then go and look them up to see if they're actually going to help you in your search. Okay, so that was a bit of a play with that first step in doing some research searching, which is brainstorming alternative keywords. So have a play with this, try with and without context, try between different models, just see what you like, see what suits your needs. And remember, this should just be a starting point for coming up with alternative terms. They may not actually be what researchers tend to use in their articles, but it is a good place to start. Okay, so next task or step in the process is once you've identified your key concepts, you've come up with your alternative terms, we start putting together a bit of a search strategy. So we've looked at how to come up with alternative terms. We could do this again for this new example that we've got, but because we're going to ask it for a search strategy, typically this will prompt the model to give you alternative terms as part of that process. Okay, so let's say we want to do a basic search to see what resources are available on a topic. So our key concepts for this example are social media, mental health, and teenagers. And we want to know what GenAI can do to help us with this. So prompt for this one, again, just we're doing with context prompts, no just simple tasks. So giving it a bit of context. So prompt for this one that I've used is, I have a university assignment where I need to find some relevant resources on a topic. The key concepts are social media, mental health, and teenagers. Can you provide a basic search strategy using these concepts? So things I was curious about before going into this, is it going to use phrase searching? Is it going to use and or? And I was just, generally curious what was going to come out. So again, the key message here is if you don't yourself understand basic search strategies or how to search effectively, this may cause more issues for you than if you were to just go and try searching yourself rather than just blindly following what it says to do. Okay, so this response goes over a few slides again. If you have any feedback, by the way, of how I can, show you these responses to prompts, feel free to pop that into the comments. But for now, we'll just look at it over a few different slides. So first up, it's done that first step in that search process, in that it's identified the key concepts and it's given some synonyms there. Okay, and it's also given us a basic search strategy. So combining these concepts and using their synonyms. And it's done, look, a perfectly okay job here. The green text, from what I can tell, is just highlighting that it's used phrase searching over key concepts where it's 2 or more words. And it's highlighted, capitalized the and the or, which is generally good practice. And it's used brackets around those different or terms. So it's nested those 3 separate concepts together. Only a couple of minor things that I might point out here. Generally, we say to use the singular version of a word, as library search and many databases will automatically find the plural. So instead of, so you would search for teenager and it would find teenagers automatically. But if you search for teenagers, it might not necessarily bring back results for teenager. So that's just one thing that you could do there. You could, if you're not quite sure on that, you can use truncation at the end of the word if there's likely to be an S there, if you're not sure if it's going to search one way or the other. Okay, so let's see what else we got. So it's given us an example of a refined search, and it's picked that, with our 3 concepts that we're looking at, we're probably looking at what some of the negative effects are. So it's suggested to actually search for the term negative effects, which, to be honest, I'm not too excited about. I would probably actually start listing actual negative effects. Or, as you're doing your research, you're coming to the conclusion yourself that these effects that you're reading about are potentially negative. But there's nothing inherently wrong with that. You can give it a go and see what comes back. So it's just a bit of a suggestion there for you. And then the second refined search that it's given here, it's included truncation, which I talked about earlier with using the asterisk. It's also said that it's using phrase searching, but it's been doing that all along. So it's not necessarily a huge step up from that basic search that we started with. And where it says academic databases, just be aware, or you just need to be aware that this is something you can also use in our library search catalog as well. So this search is also fine. It's truncated the words in a pretty good spot. Sometimes you'll see that they won't truncate teenager this far back. They might just truncate at the end of teenager just to get the S. So it's good to see that this one has chopped it back to teen. So you get teen, teens, teenager, and teenagers. There is a bit of weird stuff happening down the bottom here. It's kind of mixed up its symbols. It's got a double bracket here instead of an asterisk. And there should really be an asterisk here at the end of teen to show you that's the example. Okay, and then lastly for this initial response, it's given us some suggestions of where to search, which are fine. They're not super specific, but that's okay. And then it's given us a follow-up question to prompt further. So I thought, why not? Let's see what it can do with specific databases. As all databases are slightly different from each other, so you do need to tweak your search strategies accordingly. So my prompt was, yes. Could you please refine this for a search within Google Scholar, PsycInfo, and PubMed? And I asked Google Scholar because last time I tried this, it came back with some weird stuff. So I wanted to see if it was still doing the same thing. Okay. So for Google Scholar, it's correctly identified that Google Scholar doesn't support truncation. Google just automatically finds alternatives to words, so that's good. And at a glance, these basic searches are fine. It's not necessarily different from the initial basic search that we had. And it hasn't given any weird searches, weird responses like it did last time. If you want to know more about that, you can have a look at last year's version of this webinar if you're curious. Okay, so Google Scholar was first, then there was PsycInfo. First thing you have to realize here, our PsycInfo is not hosted by EBSCO or APA PsycNet. So, and this makes a big difference. So again, you need to be already aware of this. You need to be able to pick up on that straight away. Basically, our version of PsycInfo uses different codes. So where it says using, DE down here, that wouldn't work for the version of PsycInfo that we have. So I'm just going to ignore this response for now and go to our PubMed search. The PubMed uses what we call mesh terms or medical subject headings. And the thing to take away here is, if you didn't already know, is that mesh are a specific set of terms that have been set by the database. So you can't just tack on mesh to the end of any keyword and think you're searching for a subject heading. That's not how it works. So here, the terms that I've highlighted in yellow, these are not mesh terms, so this will not work for this search. The terms that I've highlighted in green, yes, they are mesh terms, but in PubMed, any mesh term, even if it's only one word, we do put quotation marks around them. So it has done it for these other ones here, but you would just need to put quotation marks around these ones. It's done it on teenager and adolescent, but yeah, not these single ones here. So would need to do that there. Yeah, and then it's also given this second suggestion here. First of all, I don't like that it says if mesh doesn't work well, because mesh should work fine, and you should absolutely be using mesh in every search that you're doing in PubMed. You just have to be using the right terms, otherwise, yeah, it won't work well. So there's no reason why it shouldn't work well, except unless if you are using the right mesh terms, but then not also doing a keyword search. So you do need to combine and use both there. So basically for this, if you have no idea how to use PubMed, I probably wouldn't rely on a model to help you with putting together a search strategy. Okay, so I went back and I asked it to modify the search strategy for PsycInfo if it was hosted on Ovid. So let's have a little look there. So I've highlighted a couple of things in green here for this response, where it says it must be in uppercase. It's not technically true. It's fine to put it in uppercase in PsycInfo, but PsycInfo will also accept it in lowercase. So where it says must, I wouldn't say must. Phrase searching is also not necessary in PsycInfo, similar to PubMed. You don't need to use it in there, but it's not going to do too much. Then the first keyword sort of search strategy that it's given us, I generally thought was okay. I tried this out in PsycInfo. I was curious, see where it's got mp.mp after the end of each bracket. I was curious if we needed one at the end of each set of brackets or if we could just do it at the end overall. So I typed it out exactly like this, and it did reformat a little bit. So this is what the search looks like, and it's got just the MP right at the end. So that's just a little field code telling the database where to search for those keywords. And again, at the bottom, it's done a little bit of weird stuff with telling you where to put the asterisk. So it's got a double asterisk here where it should just have one and it should have the other one there, but that's not a huge issue. Okay, and then it's also given us a subject heading search example. So similar to PubMed, it's just made up some of these subjects headings. So again, you have to use the specific terms that are set out. So depression and adolescent are not subject headings in PsycInfo. Okay, and then it's just modified that basic search where we had MP before. It's now just saying you could also search, direct your keyword search to be within the title and the abstract. So yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so again, if you're not familiar with these more complex databases, PubMed and PsycInfo, I may not necessarily rely on models for a search strategy. I would maybe go to it for a basic search strategy that you would do in like library search. But when it gets to really specific stuff, I would err on the side of caution unless you yourself know how to use these databases. But then you sort of have to go back and forth and check, if it actually works rather than just doing what you know how to do. Oh, and then it's just given some final tips, which were fine as well. The only thing I would point out on here is it's saying you can use limits and you can limit by age group, but this is quite tricky to find in PsycInfo. So again, if you're not familiar with it, it's not an obvious thing to do. So it can be a bit confusing there. Okay, so let's have a quick look at Claude now to compare, just to wrap up for today. So again, same response, and it is a much shorter response. So it's done that first set. It's identified the key concepts and its synonyms. It's given us some basic search strategies to go with. It's used, and or. It's used phrase searching around 2 keywords. So that's good. The only thing I would point out on this page is where I mentioned earlier about using truncation. We could have truncated, we could have pushed the asterisk back to teen instead of at the end of teenager. So just something to be aware of there. And then, yeah, it's also given us some databases to search in. It's suggested ERIC as a different option, and then just some general tips. So yeah, quite a big difference between the two models. It's up to you which you would like to try, or you can try both and see what you get. And then just the last couple of things that I wanted to show you. So I came across this when I was doing some of my own work, and it was giving me some wildcard examples, which just were not quite right. So just other things to be aware of. So in this one, it's put a wildcard at the end of genetic and the end of cancer. So, you could get cancel there instead of cancer. So not really helpful. And then similarly, for this one, it's put a wild card in here, thinking that by doing that, you could also get psychological and physiological, but that's not how that works. So yeah, funny little things that it comes out sometimes. So yeah, just to reiterate, if you don't have a basic understanding of search strategies, I wouldn't suggest just diving straight in and getting it to generate these strategies for you. You do need a critical eye so you can evaluate it and take what you need from it. Yeah, as I pointed out, there's a few mistakes along the way. Yeah. So yeah, today we did a bit of an exploration of how we can use GenAI to help with planning our search, including finding alternative terms and then putting together some search strategies. So if you've got any final questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat now. I'm just going to pop in a final poll for the session. And if you are interested, these are our last 2 webinars that we've got coming up, so on referencing and using EndNote. As I said, they will be recorded like this one, but if you do come along to the live session, you do get that opportunity to ask any questions as we go, ask any clarifying questions. So yeah, I encourage you to sign up. You can go through the QR code there. If you'd like to continue with discovering some more tips about how hopefully these webinars can help you with your studies. So let me just check, no questions. But otherwise, yeah, if there are no questions, if you come up with a question after today, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us, call us, chat with us. We're happy to answer questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining me today. And hopefully we'll see you next week or future.